All right, guys, what's up? This is episode 7, if memory holds correct. Atif is up in New York, so I'm going to do my best to drive the ship today. We have a really special guest. We have my buddy Jacob from the Austin Crypto Group. So, Jacob, appreciate you coming on, man. How you doing today?
Thank you. I'm good.
Cool, cool. I guess get the episode rolling, man. If you want, kind of take like 5, 7 minutes. If you want to give like a little background TLDR about yourself, kind of just upbringing, any education, work stuff you want to talk about. Obviously, I know you're a DMV guy like me, so kind of what brought you out to Texas, Austin, and kind of if any slash all that stuff, how that kind of influenced your interest in crypto, and kind of just give people a little summary about yourself before we get the podcast rolling.
Sure. So I'm a software engineer. I have 4 years of experience working on U.S. government IT contracting projects, and I took about the last 6 years on sort of a career break where I was doing blue collar work. And as far as educational background, I spent like 4 or 5 years in community college. And after that, I went on to university. I got my computer science degree at James Madison University, graduated in 2012, and went right from that into the workforce. Um, I ended up leaving that career because part of it was, I guess, being kind of disillusioned with the nature of the work. And I had some people suggest that I would enjoy startup culture more. When they told me that, I didn't really believe it at the time. But I think now, as I've been in Austin and actually seeing a lot of startup culture as it relates to crypto projects, I'm starting to see why it's a more enjoyable space for a lot of people to work in. So I did the 4 years as a software engineer. Um, that was mostly in like the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And then my kind of 6 year break after that was just I went to Harrisonburg, back where I had been at university, and I just kind of went aimlessly from one blue collar job to another. Uh, so I think we probably have a little bit similar background as far as just doing that kind of grinding work. It's not very not very fulfilling. And so really Bitcoin is the thing that got me interested in software again. Um, I found myself writing code, like just because I wanted to um, deal with my own seed phrases and private keys and things like that. And I was going down all different rabbit holes simultaneously. And at some point, I just realized I was like, oh, software is actually interesting. Um, I was interested in like the open source side of things and the sort of the magic of going to conferences where people just talk about open source software and realizing that everybody has a chance to contribute to like their idea of what they think the system should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I definitely know what you mean. Where it's more fulfilling. I guess for some of the people at home, can you kind of elaborate? Because we're in the space. I think we assume a lot of things. If you kind of had to give an analogy or comparison, let's just say from the blue chip, Apple, Microsoft's, the AOL companies of the world, the coding side, and kind of the wild wild west of crypto. What in like the startup space, like you said, what about that do you find so appealing? For example, the at the moment, the air quote, the lack of rules, just
Mhm.
the fact that the sky's the ceiling, the fact that we're taking stuff that used to only exist in the physical realm, like tangibility, scarcity, provability, and we're bringing that into the digital realm. Is it all those things? Like, what's kind of the main things, like you said, that like the light bulb went off where you're like, oh, this startup crypto DeFi space, this is going to be like the next .com bubble. At least for you, what was it?
Sure. Well, I would say it's different in a lot of ways, some good and some bad. Um, when you're working in the context of large contracting companies and government projects, some things are different just because of the scale. And I think in a lot of ways, it's probably similar to how things are in the military, where things tend to move slowly. Um, there's a lot of red tape. There's process and procedure for everything. Um, and I think that can be a good and a bad thing
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
because, yeah, because when things are more organized, sometimes that means there are better tools available and it can be easier to get things done. Um, but then it can also make the work less interesting. But I think a more important difference is that um, a lot of times it's just hard to really believe in the work that someone's doing. Like, and I think that's where it makes all the difference when people have the ability to work on new projects and open source software, and they can actually get behind the vision of trying to decentralize some particular aspect. Then I think that that's really the key difference is that when people believe in the work they're doing, then it doesn't even feel like work anymore. Uh, so I was listening to a podcast recently where one of the Bitcoin core developers was talking about some feature that um, they're working on this feature, but kind of they seem a little demoralized because when you build stuff for the Bitcoin protocol, there's a really low chance that it's actually going to make it into the Bitcoin protocol. That's sort of like the culture of of Bitcoin. It's not to change. It's not to move fast and break things, right? We
Yeah,
try
yeah,
to slow the
glacier
development.
speed, yeah, inch a day, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So on this podcast, the developer was essentially complaining that he had to spend his weekend merging code, and just didn't seem very happy about the whole the whole situation. And I'm thinking like, you know, a lot of the people that I see developing these things, they're actually excited to work on code on the weekend. So it's like we're not the same.
Yeah, I hear that definitely. Yeah, I guess a good segue too. I know recently at the meetups you've kind of been on that crypto economics train. I guess for the people at home, if you kind of also want to like um I guess like Atif and I have given enough of our opinions on the space, like where it was maybe 5 years ago, where it is now, where it could be in 5 years. What's kind of your take on the space? Because I feel like you're kind of like me and Rob, where even though you're long on the space, we try to call out the bullshit where we see it. There's a lot of white noise in the space, you know, for every nugget of truth there's just 99 fake gurus or just like charlatans the wrong word, but just basically jackasses just pulling stuff out of their ass just, you know, for a couple tweets and engagement. So like what's your take on the space? Because I feel like part of the reason you are into that crypto economics is you're trying to get down to what we said, like the truth, the vision of the space.
Mhm.
So yeah, like what's just like your general take on the crypto space right now, and I guess obviously like why that influenced you to kind of go down like this crypto economics train you've been on recently.
Sure. So one of the things I've noticed in the Sunday crypto meetup group that we're in, I think we had a connection right from the beginning because we're both Bitcoiners, and probably more so than anyone else in this group. And so for me, there's a big difference between Bitcoin and crypto,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it comes down to what the original purpose is and what the value proposition is. So my understanding has been clarified by reading Cryptoeconomics, but essentially the thesis is that um, decentralization and censorship resistance is what we're trying to achieve. Essentially, it's a form of money that can be used by anyone without restrictions. And it doesn't mean the goal is that it's going to be the money that everyone uses. It just means that the ability is there to use a censorship resistant form of money. So I think that's sort of the boundary between what Bitcoin is trying to do and what other cryptos are. They might say that they're trying to do that, but I think because of the incentive structures that kind of grow up around them, they end up just naturally gravitating away from that direction and more into walled gardens and eventually permissioned systems. Um, Now, I think even within Bitcoin culture, there's a tendency for people uh, to still shitcoin, if that makes sense. Like, I
Yeah.
think you can be a Bitcoiner and a shitcoiner at the same time. Um, I think I think a lot of people who are Bitcoiners today have definitely had phases where they're like, "Oh, I'm a Bitcoiner, but I like Luna because they have a Bitcoin reserve or something like
Mm-hmm.
that," or like me, being a Bitcoiner but also interested in stacks and not realizing that stacks is essentially a security.
Yeah.
In fact, stacks is the only token I know of that actually went through the process of registering itself as a security. So I should have been more aware of that, but the marketing is pretty sophisticated. So I think the main point of crypto economics for me is looking at the ideas that are going around in the Bitcoin circles and distinguishing the good ideas from the bad ideas. And a lot of times it's a lot more nuanced than people think.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
so, so to name one example, uh, there's a lot of hype about Bitcoin mining and green energy, and it's easy to accept that entire line and just say all the power consumption is good. It's a net good for the planet, good for the environment. And it's easy to take the opposite stand and say, oh, it's totally bad. We should try to minimize the entire footprint. But what I've come to understand more recently is that it's unhelpful. It's bad, you could say, for the for what the network is trying to achieve, for being decentralized and censorship resistant. It's bad when it takes the form of um, public corporations that are probably working together with regulation and public utilities to build like a corporate system around um, subsidized green power on one hand that's going to tie into the public utility grids, right? There's nothing decentralized about that. But the nuance to it is that doesn't mean there's no value in building things off the grid. This can be going after stranded energy to use that for mining, or especially places that are not fully developed yet, where they might even be able to bypass some of the stages of infrastructure that we've had of building up very heavy grid infrastructure. Um, and this is a little bit down the rabbit hole, but this conversation came up recently about how um, most Bitcoin mining, um, the power that goes into it, it's generated as AC power, and then it's converted into, well, typically it's AC power, and it's converted into DC to run the mining, to run the ASIC. But we're talking about in the context of green power, maybe off-grid settings where somebody might be running their own solar panels. They're generating DC power with the solar panel, and they're going to convert it into AC power only to have it converted back into DC so they can run the ASIC. So there's an inefficiency there, and it's easy to imagine as this industry slowly progresses over years that some of these inefficiencies could be eliminated, and it could make it a better fit for these kinds of off-grid and sort of bootstrapping ideas where Bitcoin could be, or Bitcoin mining could could be helpful in places, like I said, that don't have such a developed grid infrastructure. So that was kind of a long-winded answer. Do you have
No,
anything to add?
well, no, no. I think it was a couple episodes ago, or it might even been the last episode. Atif and I were talking about this. But even though, let's just, for lack of a better word, the code and the Bitcoin protocol itself may be decentralized, and there's, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. If like with the layer twos, and then hypothetically, like with if a lightning channel never gets closed, blah blah blah. But what you just said, it's like this thing we call Bitcoin, and a lot of the talking points that the Bitcoin Commons or you, me, or Atif, anyone at the Sunday group will start ringing up. There's, let's say, the main 20 out talking or outlining talking points, what you just said, like with just the energy proposition, that in itself, there's a lot of points of centralization and efficiency, blah blah blah. So I think that's good you bring that up, because people will say, oh, Bitcoin can Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin can stabilize the Texas grid, and like, that's a conversation in itself. But they act like it's just this very black or white thing. And to your point, I mean, we just had a little 5 minute chat about just the centralization problem with mining now, with it going into the future, and then also just all these inefficiencies, and especially just with how political everything is right now. It's just calling it as it is. A lot of the progressives in the Democratic camp, they're very green energy right now. So a big reason they're coming after Bitcoin is a lot of this FUD. I mean, Bitcoin mining does take up a lot of energy, but compared to the macro global thing, it's a fart in the wind. But even just that one little percent talking point, they've been, the AOCs, especially Elizabeth Warren, they've been nailing that home. So no, I think you just brought up a good point. Is that well, I guess the reason you started reading cryptoeconomics and be going on this rabbit hole, because I feel like what you just said, one thing you and I bonded over is, even though we're kind of more the two main Bitcoin maxis in the group, we're very what's the word I'm looking for? Upset's not even the word, just frustrated with the current state of things. Because I know you and I have talked about this. It's kind of like if you have some friends that are a little bit overweight and you want them to start working out with you. Well, if you take them to like a hardcore gym, they're doing ammonia salts and doing like, an AMRAP deadlift on their first day. They're going to be so screwed up the next day. They're never going to come back. Where if you take a buddy with you, you warm them up a little bit, you have them do some, dumbbell curls, maybe you have them squat 135 to like a 18-inch box for a couple reps. They'll be like, oh, cool, I feel better. Like I got a good pump. I didn't injure myself. And that's the thing with a lot of the Bitcoin maxis. I feel like they want to go from A to Z, but then they just do all this bark and this hysteria. And, a lot of them sound like Alex Jones. And they're like, no, everything's black and white. It's black and white. Everyone else is idiots. We're going to figure this out. And to your point, it's like just something with Bitcoin mining and the green energy proposition. It's like, no, that's a gray area we could talk on for 2 fucking days. And that doesn't even talk about, how most people, is it going to be not their keys, not their coins, or most people going to get their own lightning node? It's like just the how quickly the SEC and just the monkeys of the world in DC could choke off the Coinbase and the Kraken on ramps of the world. So I mean, no, that was a good segue, I guess. And correct me too, who was the guy that wrote Cryptoeconomics?
That's Eric Voskuil.
Yeah, I know you've been kind of sending some stuff in the group chat about him. I guess I don't know if you finished the book, but your brief reading of it so far. What's like your main takes on him? Because correct me if I'm wrong, he's one of the original cypherpunks, right? He was there with like James Lope and Nick Szabo, if I'm correct or no.
Um, I'm not sure about in the like really early days of Bitcoin, or maybe even prior to Bitcoin. What I do know for sure about his background, he was a fighter jet pilot, I believe, in the Navy.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And yeah, after that, he had a career in software, working for big companies. I think Microsoft maybe was one of them. There may have been a startup, like his own company, that he sold. Um, he has been he has been working on Bitcoin for, I think, at least the last 8 years. Um, uh, his project, LibBitcoin, is an alternative implementation of Bitcoin, which Bitcoin Core gets most of the attention, but a lot of people don't realize how important it is to have multiple clients. It's actually one of the things that some of the Ethereum folks have criticized Bitcoin over, is being too reliant on the core developers. I didn't really want to talk about Monero in this episode.
No, I mean
I'm,
that's
I'm
yeah,
actually
fine. I'm down if you
I'm
if you
not that
like segue, go for it.
well. I'm not that interested in Monero, honestly, but I do want to make a point as it comes up about the reliance on core devs. Um, if you think about it, I think Monero is probably one of the most heavily reliant on a few core developers of any crypto project. And I think there's very few people in the world who even understand the cryptography behind it. One of the things we're told about Monero is that, well, you can audit the supply, but you have to rely on this math that very few people understand. So the difficulty in being able to audit, and even more so the difficulty in anybody else being able to work on an implementation of Monero, I think that presents a clear centralization tendency. But fortunately, with Bitcoin, other people are free to make their own implementation. And that's the project that Eric has devoted much of his time to over the recent years.
Yeah, you actually brought up a good point there. The other week, I was actually literally just talking about this with Rob, and I kind of want your take on it. Um, Rob's like a really smart dude, just like as a person, and then life experience. He was military. He used to. I, I guess he's still a coder. He's doing his farm stuff, but he like
Yeah.
worked hands on the Cardano project, so he like is one of like these central like authority figures in our group when it comes to like understanding the shit down to a T, right? But we were talking about this how it is in like not that I agree with him in the sense that like I know this because I can't even read C++, I'm an idiot. But his point was he's like there is a shockingly small, he's like you could probably put in a couple like B-16 bombers all the people who like actually understand the core Cardano Bitcoin, Monero. He's like, you could probably put all of them on less than five B-16 bombers, and if they blew up, they'd be gone in the world. And I agree with them. And like someone listening, or we can check this later, I've always heard as a running fact that there's something like less than 10,000 people on the face of the earth that could build a capacitor from hand, like like a single capacitor. And 10,000 sounds like a lot, but it's like that's like a random bumfuck city in the middle of Texas or Oklahoma. So that's like just like a rounding error when you do the world population. But to your point, I think that is something the crypto industry is going to have to. I think they're starting to realize it, but as we progress and get crypto adoption, hyper Bitcoinization, Web3, whatever the fuck you want to call it, I think there is this weird thing of it's like don't trust, verify. Well, at some point, people can't verify it. Like for example, I tell people like they're like, "How do you know the Bitcoin protocol works?" I'm like, "Well, I've had a couple cold storages for like 3 years. Like this past run up, just Bitcoin alone hit $1 trillion. If there was some loophole to exploit that, someone would have done it just like they did with Ethereum back in 2013. Then they had the whole hard fork, etc. But I'm like, I've gone on random laptops and stuff. I've gone on block.io. I've looked up my wallets. Like I know like a couple of them. Like I have photos on my phone of just my public address. I've looked it up. Like you can check the balances when they hit, etc. And I'm doing mental math. I'm like, that's about right. But same thing, like to your point, if I really wanted to like know Bitcoin worked, I would have to audit the protocol. And there's a way to do that, but I'm not smart enough to do that. So, and like my long-winded point with this, I talked to Rob and he agreed. It's like most people don't know how an iPhone works. Most people don't know the chemical no, it's not balance, but the chemical equation when you take a B vitamin, how that affects your body. Most people don't know how a plane works. They know they just sit down, the flight attendant does their whole dance, and then they. So Rob, agree with me. It's like if something's well designed, 99% of people don't need to worry about it. They just need to use it. It's that 1% of competent people that keep it running. And I assume you would agree with this too. Like I think part of the reason our politics and other areas of the world are so screwed up is we just have people that have shouldn't even be in the street, let alone the room, are giving their opinions on something, and they're not in the least educated. Like for example, like COVID's a whole thing, like how everything was handled. But one thing I find funny about it is like after COVID, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, everyone's a doctor now after COVID, which I find funny because like most people can't name 10 muscles in the body, or if I say touch your L5, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But everyone does their 5-minute Google search after COVID. Now everyone's a doctor. So yeah, I was talking with Robert about that. I mean, what's do you think there's a remedy to that? Do you think in the next 5 to 10 years there's a way where we can get our cake and eat it too, where we the amount of competent engineers that can, for lack of a better word, just keep checking each other and improving the software grows. But also, I would say you're maybe more in that camp, but just average idiots like me or my cousin or my mom, they can just get a Bitcoin Lightning node, they can get a Trezor, they can just keep buying Bitcoin. They don't have to worry about that. Do you think we can kind of get both those in the coming years?
I think there is a solution to this problem. I think that the problem itself could be summed up as trust the experts. I think that's how we got into a lot of our problems that we're in. And it's not just a problem in politics or understanding how to respond to a virus. It's a problem with crypto, right? A lot of people's first response is, "Oh, who can tell me what tokens to buy? Who's going to give me the good trading signals?" Right?
Yeah.
It's the same problem. So I think one thing you see in crypto spaces and Bitcoin circles is these people who have become politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who's been on the scene long enough, and especially somebody who's built a profitable business in these spaces, essentially becomes a politician. And I assume some of them are probably doing a decent job, but one thing about one thing I think everybody should understand about Bitcoin is that it doesn't care. It doesn't care that somebody is a corporation of a Bitcoin company. Their voice does not matter more than anybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I was in a Twitter conversation where I don't know. I was responding to something Adam Back said, and then
Sorry to cut you off. Can I just say something? I have like one of the biggest love hates with Adam Beck because he like for example like the BIPs not protocol the what do you want to call it, the BIPs just the black magic behind it, like because I always was wondering, I was like, how does someone go from like, for example, Taproot, how does that go from someone's brain to like a message board to someone makes a rough code, like, you get what I'm saying? But he was on What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick, and he explained it in perfect English, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty crazy how like we almost have this legislative system for bips. Like no one really made it up, everyone just kind of agrees this is a good way, but like here's my point.
it's not supposed to be a legislative system. People like Adam Back essentially became Bitcoin politicians, but it's not how the system should operate.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was gonna say, and then like he goes on Twitter and says some stuff, and then I've also seen other interviews where he kind of, I know he's been in the space for a while and he's seen the good, bad, and ugly, but he almost puts himself on like the Mount Rushmore at times, which I do find, like, not saying he has earned the respect and the notoriety, for lack of a better word, but it's also, to your point, the whole thing is that there is no Satoshi, there is no lead person. Obviously him and the Gavin Andreessens, they were big players, but to your point, he's almost inserted himself in this legislative process, so sometimes I take him serious and sometimes it's like absolute power corrupts, a little bit, so for lack of a better phrase.
At this point, I can't take him seriously anymore because I know he's smart enough uh, that he's not making technical errors. I think he's being intentionally misleading. Um, a lot of this has to do with the sort of like the looking back, how people interpret what happened with the block size wars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm a relative newcomer to Bitcoin. I think I I think you are also newer than, or you got in more recently than all
I,
that shit went down.
I was basically about 6 months after. So basically, we can correct this later if I'm wrong. I believe it was about end of 16 going into 17 when the block size wars kind of got finalized. And then
Mhm.
obviously the whole 2017 was from whatever the heck, 2K to 20K, and then it popped. I got in around April, May of 2017. So I was like caught the tailwinds of it, but yeah, I wasn't in the middle of it. But I've met some people who were there, and like they said 20 the March 2020, in the last, let's call it 24 months, they said it's a fart in the wind, because they said when the block size war happened, they were like, oh, this is going to end it, because like you split the hash power, the miners, the people, but same thing, it's that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's like there was Bcash, there was Bitcoin. People were like, I'd rather go, I don't want to move fast and break things. Let's go an inch a day. And you could say the Bitcoin we have now is the Bitcoin we deserve. But yeah, I've talked to people who were around during that time that have been like since like 2013 and 2012, and they thought the block size war, like their whole take was, after the block size war, we can basically survive anything, because that was like an internal attack on ourselves.
Yeah, I think people on either camp have a tendency now to tell the story in their own favor, and I think anybody who was actually in Bitcoin back then, um, I think the reality of it was very different. I think there was just uncertainty
Mm,
about which way to proceed and what was going to work. And we can look back with 2020 hindsight and say
definitely, yeah.
Lightning's working. Well, they're still working a lot of kinks out of it. But at that time, it was totally theoretical, right? Would it even work? It was like, maybe we can scale this way. And then other people said, maybe we can scale this way. And now we have both sides essentially just taking cheap shots at the other. Um, so we could definitely see similar situations happen, I think, in the near future. And Eric Voskuil addresses the scenario of chain splits. And I think the conclusion is if there is a potential chain split, the only rational way to go about it is to hold both tokens that might emerge after a chain split, because there's too much confusion going on and you don't really know which one's going to win. And also, if everybody thinks they're just going to sell their tokens on one side of the fork, imagine what that's going to do to fee rates if everybody tries to jump in and do their
Oh
transactions at
yeah,
the
it's gonna
same
get
time.
bottlenecked like hell. Yeah.
Yeah. So the best thing you can do is just keep holding your just keep hodling, right? And let the situation sort itself out. The reason why I think we might be coming into a similar situation now is over the ordinal inscriptions. So this is something that's really blowing up right now. How familiar are you with this?
Not very. Yeah. So I guess for me and the people at home, if you kind of want to unpack that a little bit.
Okay. So there's this project called ordinals, and ordinals by itself is just a way of assigning sort of like a serial number to each sat. So just that idea itself is not really a big deal. But inscriptions, that's the idea of writing arbitrary data blobs that can be up to 4 MB, writing those into a Bitcoin block. So if this is your first time hearing that idea, I'm just curious, like what's your overall impression? Does that seem like a good or bad thing?
I mean, well, correct me if I'm wrong. To my knowledge, part of the reason SegWit. So the idea is you're kind of going to just put a serial number on every Satoshi, and then there's, for lack of a better word, just more traceability with that. To my knowledge, part of the reason SegWit became a thing is that they found out a lot of the blocks with the signatures was just taking up data it was already signed. It doesn't need to be in the block. So they that's the whole reason SegWit, layer two became a thing. So it seems like it's, I want to say, a bastardized version of SegWit, but it seems like it might be doing the same dance. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong from a technicality standpoint. At least from my first impression, it seems like a backwards, like a like a it's still solving a problem, but it's like the flip side of the coin of SegWit. No.
There is a connection with SegWit. So you are correct that um, so in the original Bitcoin, there was the signatures, and you are correct that the signatures were moved into a separate part that can be discarded. So you do need to verify the signatures, but after they're verified, you can discard them. And the arbitrary data blobs that I'm talking about, they are taking advantage of how SegWit introduced this separate part of blocks that's called the witness. And well, I guess it's a separate part of each transaction. Yes, separate part of the transaction, maybe block. I'm not that much in the weeds, but I'm trying to understand this better from a technical angle. But anyway, this separate part, the witness, can be discarded, and that's the part where these blobs are being jammed into. But again, my question is, like, does that just strike you overall as a good or bad idea?
Um, I mean, that's the thing. I don't even know, like, if I got like the technical prowess right now. I mean, yeah, I would just say neutral because, like, honestly, I can't, like I said, that when you first said it, the only thing that kind of rang a bell, I'm like, oh, this is like a weird backward version of SegWit, but I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I would maybe have to, you send me something and I read it like 3 or 4 times over, just because like, to even be honest, man, I remember like when like Lightning Taproot happened, or Lightning SegWit, it probably took me like 3 or 4 months just from reading articles, let alone going like way down like the Shaw 256. Like, because I know there's some websites that like are literally like 100 pages and they explain like bulletin by bulletin. If you want to know what every single line of the new, like, how lightning works, they'll explain it in detail. But I mean, it takes someone like you,
Well,
Rob, or
let's
Sanat.
take a step back, zoom out, and just think about what we're talking about, not from a technical side, but just from social and legal implications. So now people can take arbitrary data up to around 4 MB and just publish that in Bitcoin blocks. So it could be images, videos, text, anything.
I
Some
mean,
people say, go ahead.
oh, I mean, there's definitely could be benefit with that because I know one of the things Satoshi originally talked about was like just being able to put contracts and like legal deeds and stuff into a blockchain. And once it was cemented because there's just like I know it's like really a harsh comparison, but like with like custody battles and then like property stuff. Like, oh, a good example after, because I always bring it up, after 2008, a big issue after all these CDOs blew up. There were parts of America, I know down the south, like Alabama, Mississippi, there was whole communities. They had no idea who the hell originally owned this house because the loan for it had been cut up a million different ways. So to your point, hypothetically, you put a house loan on the Bitcoin blockchain and there's a serial traceable number, even if it was like 5 years removed, you could, I guess, to your point, like a benefit, you could go back. Like, I guess the original question, if I think that's a good idea, if you do put on the block, I guess you could say 5 years ago, oh, this is Jacob's. Even if no one remembers, you go back in the code and it's like, well, there was 5 years ago, block, whatever.
Okay, so that's potentially part of the good side. Also, people have said, well, it's good because it's a way to um, get files shared through censoring regimes. I think one of the examples that's been thrown around is ghost guns, and I assume that has something to do with 3D printed guns.
I believe
Not
so,
really my
yeah.
area, not really my area at all. But it's just the idea that it's an unstoppable way to propagate any type of data. Um, but there's also some really obvious problems with this. You can just imagine what kind of images and videos people might be uploading there. It's essentially the graffiti of the Bitcoin blockchain. Um, and I was looking at the Ordinal's website for a little while and seeing some of the amusing. So these are NFTs. Also, I should point out these are essentially Bitcoin NFTs. And for a while, I was just kind of browsing them and seeing some of the amusing ones. Like, it's got its own sort of meme culture developing. A lot of it is tied to rocks. So they're calling the blockchain the rock chain and posting a
Blockchain.
bunch of rocks on there. I guess some people say Bitcoin is a rock or a pet rock.
I mean, Isaac, there are people in our group. I think this goes back to we were talking a while ago. It's a big thing is just presuppositions and like where's people's A to Z at, because if you're someone that's move fast and break things, yeah, Bitcoin's really fucking boring for a lot of obvious reasons. But same thing, look how much stuff is I've beat this drum to death, but look how much stuff's just blown up in the last 24 months. So it's corny, but it's the tortoise and the hare. But I guess that rock chain thing, are you it is I guess we kind of saw the positive. Is one of the negatives you're concerned about is that maybe this could be a vector for attack and people could bottleneck the blockchain, or they could just Frankenstein it into something else, or what's any
Okay, so
concerns?
I didn't want to explicitly say what the real concern about this is, but I think it should be obvious. If you imagine that there's just an open graffiti zone on the blockchain where people can post any image, like I think your imagination can fill in the rest.
Yeah.
And because of the things that people have been posting, I'm not I'm not going on the ordinal site anymore, and I actually don't think anybody should um, because of the files that would then be on your computer. And I think this is definitely an attack vector because um, I'm not saying it justifies any type of legal action against people that run nodes or people that mine, but it could invite it because of illegal activity. So I think there are going to be some really difficult questions that arise from this around censorship. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. Because I was going to ask you, like Atif and I were talking about this last week. I think one thing, just Bitcoin maxis, and even myself, I think, like after talking to Atif about it, I've been thinking about it a little bit more. Is just even though the network is very centralized, there are just in North America alone a lot of chokes, and we were just talking about just with a lot of the regulations with the SEC and the OFAC compliance. A lot of companies are just doing it now, not even because they've been sent a lawyer and a piece of paper. They're just front running and seeing where stuff's going to be, in 5 to 10 years. But same thing too. It's like there's plenty of evidence with a lot of miners and just other companies in North America. You just send a couple lawyers and some paperwork, and they're gonna bend over really quick. So and that's with my point with that we were bringing up, and that's with them trying to run legit like white collar businesses, pay their taxes. So to your point, if let's just well, it's already happened, but just more vices enter the crypto space, let alone Bitcoin. I know it's corny, but we all know this. The nail that sticks out the farthest is the one that usually gets hit first. So even though you have to let innovation innovate and kind of self-correct itself. To your point, if we start again very unsavory things that like start making Silk Road look like a kid's sandbox, we could get smacked down a lot sooner. So yeah, I think that's something, obviously how that all unfolds and what it could look like. I'm an idiot. I don't know. But to your point, I think that's one thing that's good with these conversations is we point out stuff that could happen where a lot of people are like, oh no, Bitcoin fixes everything. Bitcoin's invincible. And like you and I both know this. There's 10 things we could name right now that within like 36 months could bring this whole train to a halt, So it's no, I mean, to your point, I think it's, obviously we've had the Silk Roads in the past, and I think the current innovation that's happening, if we kind of repeat that, especially with just how sour a lot of people are in DC about Bitcoin, it could definitely just bring unwanted attention. So
I think it's bringing people to an awkward moment of realization that the miners can censor anything. So Adam Back, he deleted one of his tweets where he accidentally asked the miners to just start blocking this garbage. And then he realized that goes against his whole narrative, like literally his narrative of what happened in the block size war. So he deleted the tweet. And the whole Twitter discussion I mentioned that I started, and then Adam Back and Eric Voskuil were kind of going back and forth all day last Saturday. It was around the question of can miners can they censor, right? I think it should be obvious, but some people think that the nodes are going to stop them somehow. I'd like somebody to explain how the nodes can stop, or how the nodes can force a miner to include a transaction in a block. It's like, I mean, I get it. If you have no understanding of how this network operates, you might think that, but I hear this fallacy repeated over and over by Bitcoiners. It just gets annoying at some point.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. I know one thing with individual, like, say you and I each just have our own node, and let's just say, for example, like Atif has a miner. Like, we have transactions, we kick it off. Atif wants to take your transaction, but not mine. He can do that. But on a Lightning channel, it's kind of an all or nothing thing, right? So you kind of have to take the whole Lightning, let's just call it block or none of it, right? So I've heard that's kind of part of the workarounds that if you have like a Lightning channel, once you close it and then it goes back to the layer one, whatever miner takes it has to take all that Lightning channel or none of it. Is that's my knowledge. I've been told like that's kind of a workaround with stuff, if that's technically accurate, or if you don't know,
I think,
it's
well, I think the overall idea that Lightning solves, I mean, what is it supposed to solve? Privacy?
well. I mean
Um,
that's a. I mean that's. I mean, like you do that whole thing with Bitcoin. I would say the main thing with the just lightning, the whole original purpose is just like, for example, if you and I have businesses and we're just constantly interacting with each other, we just open up a channel because we're always sending each other, liquidity back and forth instead of having to do the whole 10-minute blocks. But
well, it's not particularly useful just between two parties, but it's the utility in it is that the is being able to route payments, um, and I think it's most useful for micropayments. But in my mind, if there's a problem on layer one, it's not there to solve that. It's not there to make Bitcoin more uh, more private or less censorship resistant. Like the base layer needs to have those properties, right? And privacy on Bitcoin is essentially, it's not something provided by the protocol, but it's a choice to not identify yourself when you're transacting. And anybody can make that choice. Most people choose not to for convenience, but um, there there's a problem. There's a problem with it kind of opens the door to censorship, because if all the identities are known, or even if a large portion of the identities are known on the blockchain, then censorship becomes really easy and it can be done profitably. But to the extent that there's all these transactions and nobody knows who's behind it, it makes censorship much harder, because, well, you wouldn't know what transactions to censor, which would put you in the position of either just trying to shut the whole blockchain down or just putting up with it.
I want your take on this real quick because I've like talked about this with like Rob and Atif and I last couple episodes. Kind of, well, I beat this drum. Not that it's a checkbox thing, but to your point, I do think by the end of this decade, like we're going to see how resilient. Well, we're going to find out how resilient Bitcoin is, because all this stuff we say, I know we kind of joke about it, but it's like again, the hammer, the nail that sticks out the farthest usually gets hit first. But I would say even now, as you know, 24 months ago, we were just us. Bitcoin was $1 trillion asset. I think most people in DC and New York and just your average middle American, we were fart in the wind. But let's fast forward 10 years down the road of like DC and all this OFAC, regulation compliance starts coming our way. Like, how do I work? Like, I brought this up again, but like TMZ is always talking about Miley Cyrus and Justin Bieber. Why? Because the Hollywood elite, they're not talking about you and me like we're nobodies, right? But that's my point. If all this OFAC compliance and all these monkeys in DC and these suits in New York, they start coming for us, for like, that's kind of like how you've arrived. Like it's just like with like sports. If you're an up and coming fighter, or like you're the champ, everyone wants a shot at the title. They want a shot at you. Like if you're just an undrafted bumfuck, no one wants to go after you. So it's even though we've been talking about all this. Just stuff we need to keep an eye on, how this ship could start taking on water quick. Do you kind of agree with my presupposition a little bit, that if and when this
Well,
stuff happens, it's like we've arrived?
I think you've made a very good observation, which is that if if the goals of having decentralized money that is kind of outside the realm of the state, like if that's actually making an impact, there is going to be a backlash, right? So that's a good observation, but I guess the part where I'm going to disagree is, I've also heard you mention that for Bitcoin to be more successful, we need to bring in the suits, bring in big investment funds and things like that, maybe approve a spot ETF.
Can I just make
I don't see how.
one quick thing in that?
Mhm.
The only reason I say that, and not that like that's our only thing, but there's price targets, and there's hash rate, and there's valuations that are ahead. The only way to get to that, in my opinion, the suits will have to come in, and this isn't like just a Bitcoin thing. If you look everything from the internet to the adoption of home appliances to the industrial revolution, it was always the suits that got stuff going, put the liquidity behind it, and then it took off like a rocket. So it's not that like I want New York and all these fat cats to come in, but it's just, if you look historically, the idea that like we're going to become this huge thing without just more liquidity behind us, I think it's a fool's game. I would love for the average person to get Bitcoin and adopts that way, but I just don't think historically there's any evidence for that. And again, there's other vectors besides that, but I think one of the big 10 pillars from now to say 2030 is just more suits enter the space. Like, but again, we'll find out. But it's not not that that's like my only thing, but I mean, to your point,
Well,
it's one of the main ones.
so obviously, if they want to come in, there's really not much that can be done to avoid that. But I don't think there's any reason welcome to welcome this sort of thing because um, what it represents is instead of individuals using a decentralized network, it's a way of consolidating ownership over that network
It
into
could, yeah.
the hands of a few people. So it only makes decentralization worse. And one of the important things that one of the like nuanced perspectives that I get from reading crypto economics is that for decentralization to work, it needs to happen both on the mining side and on the merchant side independently. When I say merchant, I'm just talking about validating nodes, but not nodes that are just kind of sitting there doing nothing in somebody's basement. But uh, another term is economic nodes. It's nodes that are actually receiving payments, right? So you can kind of think of the Bitcoin economy as consisting of miners on one side, and they're providing a service to merchants on the other side. They're transacting with each other. Um, One way that Eric puts it is that in this trade, neither side is subservient to the other. So it's not really correct to say that the miners are serving the nodes, but they're just freely trading with each other. Um, the miners are providing transaction confirmation, and then the merchants are, um, well, they're freely trading with
Well,
each other.
it's just like how a real open economy should be. You know, it's like I know you'll agree with this. It's like a lot of people bitch at capitalism, and I kind of laughed, and I'm like, please show me where. They're like this thing I'm like, we have crony capitalism because to your point, in real capitalism, even if it seems like someone got less of a unit value, each person still won because to your point, they're freely trading with each other, and the other party's getting something the other one didn't, which is like breaking news. It's a healthy economy. That's how it works. But
Yeah, well, so there's some analogies to it. So you can say, well, um, with iPhones, Apple could decide at any time to stop producing iPhones,
mm-hmm,
but also consumers could decide at any time to stop buying them. And
mm-hmm.
that was given as an analogy to the role of miners and merchants, that they need each other. Neither side is subservient to the other. Eric talks about this in the balance of power fallacy. The fallacy is people assuming that miners are subservient, and this is the idea that Adam Back has been constantly perpetuating during and ever since the block size wars. Is this idea that, well, the miners are trying to do this, they're trying to have bigger blocks, but the merchants, the nodes, are going to stop them. So what Eric points out is that um, this is not a system of checks and balances. This is a system where there are separate powers. The miners have power over transaction selection. That's their exclusive domain. And the nodes have the power over validating transactions. And in their separate lanes, each one does not control the other. So my concern with this idea of bringing in suits and bringing in um, institutional money, whether it's an ETF, like a spot ETF, um, any of these consolidated um, ownership custody models, is that it's further centralizing the merchant economy. And the merchant economy needs to remain decentralized just as much as the mining needs to remain decentralized.
Yeah, I guess the follow up on the suit thing too. I know it's kind of corny where it's like one CPU, one vote. Obviously, if people have enough liquidity behind them and just means, for lack of a better word, they can start getting their own mining facilities. They can buy, and same thing, a couple lawyers and some papers can change some things. But do you also think, and I know they're controversial, but the Winklevi twins, they're obviously their suits themselves, but part of the reason they wanted a spot ETF forever and they're still working on it is because like for example, I believe it was, excuse me, it was Steph Curry and Tom Brady were on the FTX commercials. Well, why do you think they got Steph Curry and Tom Brady? Everyone and their brother, even if you're not a sports fan, you know exactly who those guys are. You know they're champions. You know what teams they play for. So it's just recognition, branding, like basic marketing, right? So my point with that is if just more suits come, like let's just say tomorrow Jamie Dimon goes, you know what, Bitcoin actually has utility. He's like, I'm not going to bet the whole race track on it, but I'm going to put 1%, even 2% of my and JP Morgan's portfolio. And like, how many people do you think would instantly be like, oh, Bitcoin's legit because, the suits? So my point is, again, I'm not looking forward to them coming, but I feel like we could bring our friends, our parents to our meetups all day. They're like, you guys are just random idiots. You're crazy people, whatever. But if they see like Tom Brady, Jamie Dimon, you know what I'm saying? Like just people who are legit, smart, big money. It just validates it more. And again, I'm not saying that's right morally. I'm just saying, unfortunately, that's how the world works, which is why FTX got Brady and Curry on their commercials.
Aren't there already enough suits that are using Bitcoin for themselves, like for their own purposes, holding it? Um,
I mean, that's a
if
question, isn't it? I don't know. I would say gut reaction, no, but I mean, maybe. But it's like, again, it's like what percentage of Americans like honestly have their Bitcoin on cold storage? It's a rounding error. So that's my point. It's like even though there may be some suits in the space, like the Peter Thiels or like I'm just blanking, like the Winklevi twins. I still don't think we've had the right suits to where your average person would be like, oh, I'm going to blindly get into this now because Tom Brady, has Bitcoin.
ask yourself this: what percentage or how many billionaires do you think are closely paying attention to Bitcoin and crypto?
I would say way more than average 9 to 5 people. I mean, I don't have data to support that, but just from being in the space and seeing interviews, I would say for every average idiot like us that's in it, I would say there's 10 1%ers. Because breaking news, like if you're in the 1%, you are always looking for that extra return, that extra ROI. So it's like I would bet you for every average idiot that's into Bitcoin, there's 5 10 billionaires who are looking at it. Again, no data to support that. That's just if I had to pick a number, it's substantially
Sure.
high.
And I couldn't really guess like what percentage of billionaires, but just looking at people that have made public statements, I think it's pretty obvious that like this is something that billionaires are taking very seriously. And I think that right there is enough for average people, if they're curious, to want to know, is this something I should be taking seriously? I'm just fundamentally opposed to encouraging uh, any type of custodial arrangement that's going to further centralize and consolidate things. So I don't have a problem with a high profile person being involved with Bitcoin at a personal level. I have a problem with trying to create new structures that we don't need, like Bitcoin spot ETFs or anything of that nature.
Definitely, yeah. I guess like to wrap up on that too. It's yeah. I'm not inviting either. It's just one of those things too where it's um, I think the hardcore maxis on the Twitter realms that are like, oh, this is just gonna be our little niche thing. Maybe in 10 20 years, Bitcoin is still this weird little pet rock in the corner and maybe still used for drug stuff. But it's just in the 5 years I've been in this space, it's just the progress that's been made. It's I don't unfortunately, even as someone I like is like a functional Bitcoin maxi, I just can't see how 10 years from now it doesn't. Not that it gets fully adopted, but part of let's just say it's an octopus. Some of our tentacles don't reach into the DC, the New York realms of the world. But one thing I want your take on too, because I guess it's like a good little segue. Um, uh, I, a couple weeks ago, Atif and I went down a rabbit hole, and he actually I want to say he changed my mind, but I've been thinking about it more, and this kind of goes back to our like centralization topic. What's your whole take on like, for example, like not your keys, not your coins? Because this is kind of one of those ABC things in crypto. Like for example, all the blowups that just happened showed like you can only trust a third party until you can't. But for example, if we're going to get mass adoption, do you see 55, 6 year old soccer moms, grandmas getting two or three Trezors, doing multi signatures, blah, blah, blah? Like, what's like your take on that? Because that's another thing too, where part of the reason again not big on the suits coming in, but I think like for example a spot ETF would help a lot is because how many people are seriously going to, like we're hardcore in this, like yeah, no shit, you're going to hold your own keys, but how many average people do you think are going to do that? And that's what Atif was saying, where one of the big stepping blocks in the next 10 years is we're going to have, let's just say 20 to 30 in North America, custodial companies, and their only job is to hold coins, and maybe they have a high ass fee, it's like 5 or 10%, like whatever, but they don't trade, they don't do derivatives, they don't anything, there's no ROI bullshit. It's like you literally just hold my coins when I want them in a year, here's your 5% charge, and you send them to me. So like I know that was a lot, but like what's kind of your whole take on that? Do you think we can get mass adoption with normal people? Do you think normal people are going to go through the hardcore ABCs and not your keys, not your coins, cold storage, blah blah blah?
I don't see mass adoption as being beneficial in any way. I think that's the fundamental difference here. Um, when I hear mass adoption, I just think, well, what went wrong with the gold standard, right? We had mass adoption of gold, right? And we had dedicated custodians for it, you know, and look where that ended up. So I see it as just a repeat. It can just easily, that history could easily just repeat itself, and it would happen much faster in a digital way. There would be no need to physically go into,
Confiscate, yeah.
uh, right. You wouldn't have to go to physical locations like banks. You wouldn't have to take it out of people's safety deposit boxes. You wouldn't have to ask people to turn in their gold to the nearest whatever. It could all just be a stroke of pen at that
Yep.
point.
Yeah, it's a weird one, man, because like what you just said, I was telling Atif originally, like, like I think it was 1933 they passed the first gold thing and banned it, and then we went back on the standard in the 40s, and then I think for whatever it was, or it might have been even like late 40s, but then same thing, 71 they officially got off the standard, but like in a 50-year period they did a weird seesaw.
Wait, when you say back on the standard, I want to clarify. I don't think that the under the Marshall, well, not Marshall, the Bretton Woods system, where the world was on some sort of gold standard, I don't think that meant that you could just take your dollars and convert them to gold, you as an individual. I think this gold window was open for other central banks, right?
Well, yeah, and that's my point though. I think it was like 1933 or whatever they made it in America, unless it was like jewelry or like silverware or something like that. But you couldn't have like gold, silver bars in your house anymore. And then I think they repealed that in like 1945. But to your point, you could own gold and as American, but the silver and gold tickets, I believe, like you said, were done. But it's like, hey, you still have a store of value. But then we basically defaulted in 71 to your point because all the other banks in the world, we were just like, all right, we're not using gold anymore. It's just going to be a dollar for a dollar, and basically screwed the world
Uh,
banks over.
well, yeah, I would argue that we defaulted before 1971, but that might be splitting hairs. But I think that 1971 was just acknowledging the reality that the established exchange rate between gold and the dollar um, did not reflect market realities. And I think as soon as some other country, maybe it might have been France, I think actually wanted to like cash out their dollars for gold, and that's when the gold window closed. And I think it might have even been sold as like some kind of temporary measure at the time, but
Oh no, no. I mean,
it was
again, I don't want to get political, but that's part. One of the things that was funny is when COVID started, some of the biggest thumpers against the lockdowns were Bitcoiners because they were like, "Hey, this whole 2 weeks to stop the curve bullshit. That's I think gold was supposed to be 60 days, and then like it's literally like still been. I forget who said it, but the most permanent measure is a temporary government ban, and
yeah.
it's. I mean, you laugh, but it's just. I mean, like in COVID showed it, and like again, that's a rabbit hole I don't want to get down, But I mean, and to your point too, it's they say if you can see the iceberg, you've already hit it. To your point, 71. It's not like someone just like was that Nixon or Carter? It was Nixon, the president, but whoever. It's not like he woke up that day and was like, oh, we're just gonna say screw this. It was like a decade plus of build up, because it's the same thing too. '08 didn't happen. '08 was basically a decade of build up from the dot-com bubble blowing up, everyone trying to make their profits back, CDOs, blah blah blah. So to your point, um, you know, there's by the time you see smoke, there's already a fire. So to your point, it's not like 71 was the was actually defaulted. It was more or less just the last straw break-in. So I guess like a little segue here too, man. I think we've kind of beat the negative drum, like stuff we're worried about looking rearview mirror about the block size war. I guess like looking forward, man. Anything in crypto right now exciting? Like I know you might be in this camp. We're in a bear market. Everything's going sideways. A lot of the white noise is gone. I guess like the next, let's just call it 24 to 36 months, man. I mean, it could be price action, anything in the industry you're excited about. You're like, I don't know, it just has you looking optimistic. You're like, this could be the next thing. This could get us to the next leg up.
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier sort of the dejected tone that I kind of observed with some Bitcoin core development, where there's all these proposals that is essentially they're just spinning their wheels because most of these things are not going to make it in. But I have been very encouraged just with sort of the startup culture seen with local developers that are working on Bitcoin projects around here, because these people are optimistic and they're building, and there's really not much discussion about the price, the charts. We don't make predictions, and people are working on things that they enjoy, and that's sort of the magic I alluded to earlier of free open source software and building decentralized systems. And I think Bitcoin's only the beginning, right? So, well, Bitcoin was the like not even the beginning. We already had decentralized networks, right? There was BitTorrent, um, and we have Git, which is distributed version control. And what we've needed for a long time is decentralized social media. So I think that's one of the most exciting developments that's currently underway.
Are there any projects on that social media? I definitely agree with you. I think, especially now with the Twitter files coming out, it is obvious that we have put too much blind power and faith in a handful of institutions over the last decade, and even over the last two presidential cycles. There's evidence on both parties, on both sides. There has been rampant corruption and trying to influence the vote, and there's a fine line between like advertising, marketing, and political corruption and sway and stuff. But yeah, to your point, there's obvious evidence of that. Is there any companies you can name right now or projects that you're like, this could be the next Twitter, this could be the next YouTube on the decentralized front?
Yeah, so you made a good point about the Twitter files and just the corruption that's being revealed. And I think, for whatever we might think about Twitter, I think we can probably say something worse about Facebook. But it seems like there there were improvements made with Musk taking over Twitter, um, but maybe it's not all good, because I think the the ideal of decentralized social media is not to push things in one political direction or another. So I think like Musk taking over definitely was a relief for people who had their voices suppressed on one side of the political spectrum, but it doesn't really create it doesn't really create a neutral platform,
Mm-hmm.
I think. So I think I think what a true alternative is something like Noster, where it's not an app, it's not a product, it's just a protocol, and then apps can be built on top of it. Uh, they could be like Twitter clones. It could just be a chat app. Maybe it could be something more like Instagram. But it's essentially the idea is that you have this decentralized protocol, and then people can build whatever they want on
I guess here's a question for you. Do you think that's something the masses would actually see the utility in? Because here's the reason I ask this. I thought a lot of people did this. I guess maybe it's just like I'm batshit crazy, so like whatever. But my Instagram, for example, is a lot of bands I follow. A lot of there's a couple crypto people I follow in there, but they usually post like their own goofy shit. They don't get like down the libertarian rabbit hole. Bands, basically like professionals I'm interested in. And then Twitter, I follow the Matt Taibbi's, the Snowdens, the oh my I'm blanking on the other reporter's name right now, but he's been putting out a lot of Daniel Morrison. I basically use Twitter. Like I follow some meme accounts, Kobe, Udi, how serious those two guys are. But I use it more of like a news feed. And when I talk to some people, like they follow a lot of the same people on Instagram and Twitter, and to them they're kind of like the same thing. Where to me they're like segmented in my mind. And part of the reason like I would like something else is like recently I've been seeing people on Twitter I haven't seen in months, and then I go to their profile, they've been tweeting nonstop. So it's like, were they shadow banned? Was it just an algorithm change? Like no one knows what's under the hood. No one knows how the sausage is made. But like if I talk to some of my normie friends about this, like again, I feel like there's something in the crypto space we have a touch on because it's like this is swinging elections, medical misinformation, blah blah blah. Do you think even let's say uh, let's say like a decentralized Twitter came out tomorrow, do you think even within like 6 months, 10% of users would go over to it? Right now I would say no. Maybe in 5 years that could change, but do you think enough of the masses are, I hate this term, but they're woke enough to be like, we need to actually get like a real public town forum going again?
Uh, I'd say it's an experiment in progress. Noster is live, and even in the last week, a lot of new people are on it. I think they just recently got the Damus app, which is a client for Noster. They just got that approved in the Apple Store, and apparently it's really big in China, which kind of makes sense because when you're introducing a censorship resistant technology, you would expect a lot of mass adoption where people need it the most. But you mentioned following people like Snowden. Snowden is already on Noster. He's active there, and it's at this point it's out there in the wild, and we'll just have to see where it goes.
Yeah, one thing you said, I definitely think we need to have a bigger conversation on is just in America, even though, for example, like '08 happened and our banks are very corrupt, we still have a pretty solid banking system where again, correct the numbers on this later. I believe 1.5 to 2 billion adults in the world right now don't have access to like a proper JP Morgan Chase banking. So even though like we're big on Bitcoin, we hypothetically don't need it here in North America for the most part, but definitely developing parts of Asia, especially a lot of Africa. A lot of those people, it's funny is the wrong word. It's just interesting circumstances where some of them they don't even have shoes or drinking water, but like maybe in a village of 200 people there's a couple smartphones, so it's like they could get a Exodus wallet going, a Coinbase wallet, blah blah blah. And to your point, it's like even with our issues with Twitter, it's like with Noster, it might kick off in other parts of the world before it hits America, because that was talking with Sanad about this past Sunday. He went back to India, and I forget the name of the company he was using, but they have something now that it's like Grubhub on steroids. Like if you just came over and we were making some drinks before the game, he was making some traditional drink for his family. He's like, shit, I forgot ginger and lemonade. Literally, he ordered it, kept talking to his brother within like a 7 minute window. A kid on a bike came up and delivered it, and then like he didn't even have to like check his processing. There was like some built-in account like with your tolls, and it just auto enrolled. But like he said, literally he did it like 5 times in 1 week, and it's just like whatever you needed, it was there in 5 minutes. And like part of the reason that's like what's the word I'm looking for? So adopted in India is just because of like traffic and other infrastructure stuff. But he said like he could see in 5 or 10 years that hitting America, but it's like America doesn't need that right now. He said the reason it was taken off in India was from a necessity standpoint. So I guess it's the only reason I bring that up, because like what you were saying, it may not kick off in North America, but back to my point, and not is that even though we find a lot of things cool here in America, we don't actually need them, because even though we have a lot of issues, stuff runs really well here compared to the rest of the world. A lot of this technology and adoption happens because it's a day-to-day necessity. So we're here, it's more of a convenience.
Yeah, I think when we're just talking about the censorship, it's not as much of a pressing need unless you're more on the fringe on certain areas. You're still free to have a conversation on Twitter. There's a wide range of viewpoints that you can still find on there. I think one of the big selling points of an open system like Nostr as opposed to Twitter is that it gets away from the algorithm. And you mentioned like not seeing tweets of some people you follow for a while, and then you wonder like, why is the algorithm doing this? And I don't think the algorithm is intentionally a problem, but I think it's a limitation of these walled garden
Yeah. Well,
systems.
it can become a
And
feedback loop, you know.
mhm. Yeah, and I think Nostr is an experiment in a new model where there's literally no algorithm. Um, it might be hard to imagine how that works, but just imagine instead of like one system that's a walled garden and has this algorithm that's going to decide what you see. Imagine that there's instead a free market of Twitters, but the user base is there, but you can choose like your own Twitter or a combination of them. And that's essentially what relays are in this network. So I think it's a very exciting model of where things could go.
I don't know if you would know. I don't know if there was any former Twitter employees there or anything, because I know right before Jack Dorsey stepped down, I think he's still on the board, but like he stepped down as like CEO, president, whatever his title was. But he was talking for a while because he's a big Bitcoin head himself, and it's funny even though he runs Twitter. I don't know. Maybe it's just the bureaucracy of everything, but I've seen interviews. I mean, especially when he was on Joe Rogan, he seems like he's kind of like a classic liberal, almost like a libertarian. Like he's big on free speech, and he was obviously the legalities of this with because I think Twitter is like in 100 countries and this, that, and a third. But he almost wanted to make a Wild West version of Twitter where like you have to be 18 because you can see porn and other bullshit on there. But like
So I
basically it would be like Wild West, no algorithm, no filter, and I guess what that Naster, I didn't know if it's. Long story short, when I was on Rogan, he was saying, "Yeah, we have some guys working on it, and he's like, there's gonna be different like tranches of it, and basically what you're describing
that's
is
what
almost what he
that's
was
what
talking
Nostr
about."
is. Yeah, that's what Nostr is. A lot of people are kind of first discovering it right now. Even within the last week, a lot of new people are on there. Um, that's the project that Jack was talking about. That's what he funded. So he gave like a large number of Bitcoin. I don't know, but it was
Sorry,
like
but he did fund this.
yes.
Okay, so that's what I said. I was getting deja vu because I'm like, this sounds just like what Dorsey was talking about like forever ago. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is it. This is it. And it's good that you mention him because having people like that you could just consider a classic liberal who's not on the right side of the political spectrum is extremely important if something like this is going to get anywhere. Because we've already seen the model of like having a Parler or Mastodon and none of these ideas can really get off the ground. There needs to be a platform that works for everybody, and you can put yourself in an echo chamber by your own doing, but the platform itself should not be an echo chamber.
hmm Yeah, it's one of those weird ones too, where it's like they say just a I mean I just blanked on it. They say a function environment is where the creature in the ecosystem. It kind of goes back to like our whole miners nodes thing. They have a equal input output on each other because like biologists they always argue like does the creature affect the environment or does the environment affect the creature? It's like well if you have a healthy ecosystem they actually do both simultaneously because back to our point on like miners and nodes they need each other. So if we to like next 5 years if the Naster and then other the Instagram and maybe I don't know Reddit's pretty open for the most part, but like a Facebook version comes out, we could see it could definitely help public discourse or it can make it worse, and like you said, it's a big old experiment. We'll kind of find out. So, but
Yeah, I really couldn't see it making things worse. It seems like a very positive direction to me. And one of the things that's held back some efforts in the past was that people would try to attach a blockchain to the idea of a decentralized social network. Um, Nostr has no blockchain. You're going to find a lot of Bitcoiners on Nostr, but it's a totally separate protocol. It doesn't have anything to do with a particular blockchain.
so do you think that's good that it's more or less it's how do I word this? It's almost kind of just like freedom of speech or free knowledge. It's like going to be regulated by the community because obviously I'm kind of with you. I feel like a lot of people, one thing hate about this last bull market was people I don't know. People think just like if you slap the word blockchain on something, it makes it bulletproof. That like and like I mean, you know this way more than me, like because I'm an idiot when it comes to this technical stuff. All blockchain is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's a network that has agreed to like a fixed set of rules, right? That's kind of the main definition of like a blockchain or like a layman's version. So to your point, like even if you try to make something that's free speech on a blockchain, you kind of to your point, you can run to the same issues where maybe there isn't an algorithm, but if you have a blockchain with set parameters because it is in code, well, you might run into suppression of speech just because of the nature of the blockchain, even if it wasn't intentional. So to your point, the fact that it's kind of just open free air could actually make it like a real platform for free speech because breaking news, that's how free speech works. Like we have laws in America, but basically I can walk outside and start screaming stuff and whatever happens, but that's how free speech works. There's no barriers and border blockchains around
So
it.
think about what a blockchain actually is. It's a centralized repository of data, right? And there's a lot of cost to achieving consensus. Um, Having this single source of truth, this ordering of blocks and transactions, it only makes sense for money. It doesn't make free speech better. It doesn't improve most things that you would want to apply a blockchain to. So um, a blockchain doesn't really help with censorship of free speech either, because it's a permanent record of anything. So if there are things that are illegal in it, over time, people are just going to stop supporting those systems, and that kind of gets back to the things I was saying earlier about the inscriptions and how it's like the graffiti of the blockchain. I think over time the blockchain evolves to where it's only storing financial transactions because that's really the only thing that makes sense to have on there. When you're just talking about open speech in general, there needs to be the ability to censor, but you need to be able to censor in a decentralized way. Like I need to be able to decide what I want to let in and not. And myself as a client and also relays, it's going to be like sort of this organism that is, there's no centralized censorship. The protocol itself is open, but a blockchain doesn't help with that in terms of free speech, because like I said, if your blockchain is facilitating things that people find very unsavory, people just aren't going to use that blockchain anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so realistically, what's going to happen is if you're trying to store like this sort of arbitrary data on a blockchain, you'll probably find out that there's some backdoor where people can remove or censor things. So I think it's just a false promise. I'm really not big on
I
ghosts.
I like that what you said, false promise. I feel like that was the main thing this past bull market is people just slapping blockchain on something.
Yep.
And even as me as a non-technical person, I would just see stuff on Twitter like this, that, and a third. I would just go to a white paper and I'm just like, this is a solution out looking for a problem. It's like it's a
Exactly.
false promise, and it's that's and to our point, the reason I just brought that up with a lot of Bitcoin maxis, they just say like Bitcoin fixes this. It's like actually no, if you put a blockchain on this one area, like for or just like we said, free speech. I mean, you can make it 20 times worse because like it's already working pretty well now. It's just we need to find a way, just like with the whole double spend issue in Bitcoin, we need to find a way to take free speech, put it in the digital realm, and just still allow it to operate, like we said, without all the barriers and algorithms. But no, that you nailed it right there. Just the false promise. That's like sums it up in a T.
Yeah, and so speaking of the false promise, I think we see that with the idea of decentralized file storage, and this is not this doesn't even have to be on a blockchain, but um, with the whole discussion about the ordinal inscriptions, that's the promise that you're going to write this data in the blockchain, and it's like this eternal file, right? It's forever in the blockchain. But I think what we'll find is that over time, nodes will be discarding this data. And I think if people realize that now, the novelty might wear off and there might be a lot less demand for this type of usage. But it kind of gets back to my point that the blockchain is really specialized for one thing, and that's financial transactions. And it can also be used as a time stamping mechanism, which in that case, you're really just writing a small hash into the blockchain, and you can verify that something existed at that time. But other than that, it's not useful for just storing arbitrary data.
I know it's a little grotesque to a degree to say this, but do you think I do agree with you? I think that one of the it's not a coincidence that I think 60 days after Lehman Brothers went under, basically Bitcoin launched. Satoshi kind of became a person, they, them, like whatever. And like people thought in '08 the world was going to end. And there's a lot of evidence that like it could have. That's a whole other thing in itself. But the fact that it started after Lehman Brothers, it was in the finance, trying to fix the legacy financial system. I don't find that as a coincidence. So do you think, to your point, that it's a little grotesque, but it's like if Bitcoin, you fix the money, you fix the world. Do you think is like whether it's Bitcoin or something else? Do you think if some blockchain in the next 20, 30 years revolutionizes the finance industry, it hypothetically fixes everything else? Is like a trickle down effect?
Hmm. I think this idea of revolutionizing finance, I think that's another false promise where people end up in the DeFi space. Like to me, DeFi is a total nothing burger. But again, it's one of those nuanced points where it's clear that there are problems with our money. Like I think our money is dishonest. One of the things Eric Voskuil talks about is the risk-free return fallacy, and it's we see it with deposit accounts, like your checking or savings account, where that money is being lent out,
Mm-hmm.
but at no risk to you. Well, there is a risk.
Yeah.
The risk is inflation, right? So it's just a way of masking the risk. Um, but the nature of lending and finance itself doesn't really change. Um, I think the money can get better. um, I think it's possible to fix the money, and then like other things can improve as a result downstream from that. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions really popular among Bitcoiners of thinking that they're somehow going to eliminate the banks and there's going to be no more fractional reserve banking.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there might be more transparency about the risks that are associated with investing. But this idea that everyone is just going to hoard Bitcoin and disregard traditional investments is completely bonkers. Like, if you think that there's no utility in owning companies through stocks, or if it's a smaller company, or owning real estate and just having productive investments, that might work for you for a while, but eventually you're going to have a rude awakening when you realize that you don't own anything that matters, right? That you went like extremely long on Bitcoin and on a speculation. And I mean, depending on your entry point, that might work out well for you, but it's really hard to say. It's a speculation. We can't really make an assumption on what the total market cap of it is ever going to be.
Oh yeah, no,
So
there's figures. It's that the reason I brought that up is even though like I'm probably one of the more longer guys in the group on Bitcoin, I believe Charlie Shrem coined it. It's like this is the world's largest economic experiment, and it really is. We're gonna find out like is like first off what is money. That could be a 20-hour talk in itself because like you can make an argument that even the world economists they can't tell you what the dollar is, what drives it, what drives the economy because the last 36 months showed it. But I mean, no, to your point, it's I do think that's a big thing in crypto that we have to come to grips with, I guess, for lack of a better word. All this is a big experiment right now. I think Bitcoin and Ethereum have showed that they're at least probably going to make it the next 5 or 10 years. They could still die, but they have enough horsepower behind them. I do agree with you. DeFi is a big nothing burger at the moment, but at a certain point in time, Bitcoin was a nothing burger. I think the first 2 or 3 years there was no actual market value to it. It's like, what was a Bitcoin worth? You want to give me a car for it? You want to give me $1? But I could see in 10 years DeFi polishes itself out. But I do agree with you. I think that's one thing that we don't talk about enough in the community. That even though there's code behind this and smart people and equations and blockchains, this is still a really big experiment, and this could come undone any day, either internally or externally.
well, I think there's a whole different, like the existence and success of Bitcoin as a money compared to DeFi. These are on totally different levels because Bitcoin already works as money for people that need it. Um, but DeFi seems to be based on this idea that you can somehow eliminate the risk that's involved in finance by writing code, and that's complete nonsense. It's either not doing anything productive or it's masking the risk. But in any finance, there's going to be risk. And most of what is called DeFi today is just a way to bet on tokens, right?
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
You can just bet on a token pair. And then a lot of these tokens don't even need to exist. But I can't even see it evolving into something that's actually productive in terms of financing things. Like the only thing that might make sense at all that would sort of change financing, I don't think it would have anything to do with blockchain. It might be more to do with AI, like that could make some decisions quickly. And I think if you're honest about it, we already have that. Because like if I go into my Discover account right now and request a personal loan, I'd be very surprised if a human is even approving that financing,
Oh no,
right?
for real. Yeah. Unfortunately, scary.
Yeah, because I've borrowed, I have a good history with them, a good overall credit score. And that's something that an algorithm can easily do. It can say, yeah, this is a good credit risk, go ahead and do the financing. But again, there's blockchain doesn't help with that.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. I think it's one of those weird things too, because I think explaining the internet back to people in the '90s, it's like, wait, why do I need information to connect with people? And now it's like you can't like live with. I mean, Austin, we've had this snowstorm the last 24 hours, and like people are walking around the streets like zombies, no electricity, no internet, so it's just like we're addicted to it. But I mean, I think I've brought this up before, and I mean, this is kind of low hanging fruit, but like a year or so ago, I was there was a big band coming into town, and I was working backline for it. And basically, we had like 2 or 3 days of setup. And the PM went, "Hey guys, we talked to the people. If anyone wants to go to this, you can get tickets for like 30% off, whatever. Or if you want to work backline that day, get paid." And I'm about my money. Like it was a cool band, but I don't really listen to them. My buddy wanted to go with his girl. And he's like, "Hey man, if you can buy me the tickets, I'll cash app you." Cool. And I think I've told you this. I was like 2 hours before the concert. Like I'm in backline talking to. I'm like, these are like, this is my property. Like it's my property. Why is this so hard to send this to somebody? So the point is like literally, I was like not an hour before the show. My buddy's outside with his girl, like barking with security about it, and I finally got him the tickets. Ticketmaster, he got in. But it's like hypothetically, if that's on a blockchain, like I can send you my Ethereum right now, pay the gas fee, and no one's really going to stop me. So I think it's like little stuff like that. And like I said, after obviously the problem was created by the banks, but all these CDOs, there were towns for like 5 years after 2008. No one had any idea who owned the houses because the loan got chopped up 1,000 different ways. So I mean, I do hear you. Right now, it's a nothing burger. I feel like a lot of innovations are, everything from the car to the plane. I'm not justifying all the dog shit that's happened in the last 12 months. I'll agree with you. It's, I think, a lot of someone that even owns Ethereum. I think a lot of its value and market cap and the tokens under that, a lot of it's hot air just because you trade token Z for token Y. So I think that needs to get cleaned up. But I think in 10 years it could be something. But I guess back to our point, it's a big experiment. We'll find out. But I do agree with you. I think that's one thing we're going to find out in the next 10 years is has blockchain is its only utility is finance, and has it actually solved it with Bitcoin? Right now, I'd partially agree with you, yes, but I think the market will decide that in
Well,
the next 10 years.
I, I wouldn't say it's finance. I would say it's literally just money.
Okay, so I agree. I get what you're saying. You're going to segment it too, because you could, yeah, like what is money, what is finance? Yeah, that's different rabbit holes. But I get what
Well,
you're
to me,
saying.
finance is there's human decisions to choose one thing over another, to choose to invest in particular people and projects. And to me, that's what finance is. Um, Money is just, I can send it to you, right? It's a transactional layer. But then finance is decisions about what to invest in.
I guess one thing to kind of wrap up on, I want your take on this. I believe it was Austin Hill kind of pushed this for a minute. He was one of the original cypherpunks. What's your take on that? Like, I know Greg Foss, he's like a Canadian hedge fund guy. I don't know if you follow him. He puts out some good articles here and there, but they kind of view money in its entirety as stored energy, which is why like people get paid by the hour. So the idea is like you work 5 hours and you go buy something, you stored 5 hours of energy that like someone recognizes. What's your take on that? Do you think like Bitcoin is still kind of that with the whole mining? It's stored energy. Like what's your well? First, do you think money is stored energy? Do you think it's more of a ledger? And then like, do you think Bitcoin is advancing either of those two, or it's just like we said, it's putting them in code and it's making it more concrete where people can't duck around with it?
Uh, that's actually a really interesting rabbit hole. What is money? Um, I had my first crypto economics meetup on Saturday, and we went pretty hard on this question, right? What is money? I think the most common answer you'll hear is people will just repeat the three things that they've heard. It's a medium of exchange, it's a
Change, yeah.
unit of account, and a store of value.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, but then it is an interesting question. Like, what does energy have to do with it? Is it a store of energy? There's actually a chapter in Eric's book called the energy store fallacy. Um, and some people assume that Bitcoin is valuable because of the energy that's used to produce it. And that's actually not true because um, we assume that Bitcoin will continue to be valuable after all of it has been produced, right? So the energy that goes into minting the new tokens is just a rational way of distributing them, because if there wasn't a cost to it, then somebody would be minting them at their own advantage. It would essentially be the way our fiat money is produced as a tax. Essentially, it's produced as to the advantage of the people who have the privilege of producing it. So I think that the energies, it's still an interesting question. Um, one one person who attended the meetup actually brought up what I thought was a really, really good insight uh, on the question, what is money? And he said that in a lot of ways, we use petroleum as money.
Yeah, OPEC, yeah.
hmm Whether it's oil pipelines, or I guess it moves over tankers and then gas pipelines. In some sense, that's the money between nations. Like, that's what facilitates the exchange. It's the medium of exchange between nations. And there is an interesting connection between the energy, because that is a source of energy. And it also helps detach the idea of money from store of value, right? Because you don't want to store it. Like, you want to use it as you're getting it. You want a strategic store for sure, but you don't want a huge stockpile of petroleum. Ideally, you want to be using it as you obtain it, and storing is actually a cost. Like, when COVID first hit, the price of oil was negative because demand dried up and it was still costly to store it.
Yeah, I've talked with Carl about this a lot too, because he's kind of helped me like mold this thesis a little bit. Like I've been like constantly working on like my like 5 minute TED Talk Bitcoin thing, but I don't know if it was just people were lazy, or it's like, like someone made the Bitcoin logo and it was gold, blah, blah, blah. But we've said it's like gold 2.0. Well, gold's been around for, I think we've been using it for like over 7,000 years. And originally it was just like jewelry and like, there was religious purposes, blah, blah, blah. But then especially in the last 100 years, we have found so many utilities in from medicine, technology, like, there's probably stuff we're going to figure out in the next 100 years that we didn't even know. So my point is, gold started off as A, and then it got to Z on a utility standpoint, or where the value came from. So I think that's the thing with Bitcoin. It's like it's if it was a person to be a 13-year-old, you don't take a 13-year-old seriously. They're fucking 13. So I think it's like it could still take another 10 years for us to really figure out like, what is Bitcoin? Where does the value come from? Is it valuable because there's a cap? Is it valuable because we say it's valuable? Is it the decentralization? Is it the miners? And I think it's all of those, but I think like in the next 10 years we'll be able to solidify more. For example, it's like, what make a fire extinguisher valuable? It's only valuable until you have a fire. until that, it's just like a paperweight in the corner of your kitchen. So I think it was just the reason I was asking that. It's like because Atif had a good take. I definitely I agree with yours, and it's just one of those weird things where we all believe in this thing, but we also all have different presuppositions on what makes it valuable. And I always kind of find that funny, where if you get 10 Bitcoin crypto people together, they'll all still find Bitcoin valuable, but their base presupposition is vastly different, which I've always found interesting. It's just one of those consistent things where everyone finds Bitcoin valuable for totally different reasons, and they're all valid, but they're not bang 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 linear.
Well, I think they're valid in the sense that value itself is subjective, and that's a point that Eric drives home over and over and over again. And so Bitcoin is not valuable because it has a hard cap, or the fact that it has a hard cap where you can calculate the stock to flow ratio. That doesn't tell you anything about what the price should be expected to be at. The whole stock to flow analysis is complete garbage, because what we know about the stock to flow of Bitcoin is that it's just a function of time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're comparing it to the stock to flow of like some commodity, it's not even a good comparison. Like you're just comparing apples to oranges at that point, because
I agree with that. Yeah.
Bitcoin stock to flow it's going to cap out. The stock to flow is going to be infinity. But again, that doesn't tell you anything about how people are actually going to value it themselves. People are going to value it based on the utility that they get from it, from being able to send it and to be able to have money that's not censored and to have the decentralized aspect of it. And we don't know what the market valuation of that is going to be.
No, I agree with you. There's estimates from Greg Foss. He thinks by 2030, 35 will be $2 million of Bitcoin. And I'm going to butcher this really bad. If you take annual yielding debt like bonds around the world and pension funds, I believe that's 400 trillion. If Bitcoin takes 10% of that, that's 40 trillion. Hopefully my math isn't off. 40 trillion divided by 21 million, I believe, is like $1.72 million of Bitcoin. And then you have some people that say like it's like the next, I guess, like milestone is we take out gold, which is like $10 trillion, which then puts us at like $500,000. Like, and again, there's all these moving figures. And to your point, it's like the market's going to decide it. I think one thing we have to do in the community is stop putting Bitcoin in this box. And like we keep saying, it's like this liberation tool, but we try to put it on these guardrails and like, oh, this is what's going to do in 5 years and 10 years, where it's like 5 years ago to send $100 of Bitcoin cost me like $10. Now it's like a rounding error. So it's like 5 years from now, it's like God knows, Kenya could be like half of Africa. Like it could literally be their walking currency. It's like, who knows? So I think that's, yeah, like you said, it's we need to let the market actually decide.
I think the value is going to depend on utility.
Oh, that's my point. I'm just saying, like with the utility, back to your point, is that the market needs to decide it, and same thing, 5-10 years from now, half of Africa could be using it like as their only legitimate currency. Whether you're going to a AAA bank in Kenya or you're talking to some farmer with 3 cows in the middle of the Congo, for all we know, and this goes back to our point, it's like a lot of Africa, they actually need Bitcoin. So I think a lot of the just for calling it what it is, a lot of privileged people in North America that have developed banking systems, we have this very rigid guardrails of where Bitcoin's going to be. And to your point, it's like we will know the price and the market cap once the utility's been solved. And it goes back to my whole creature and the like, does the environment affect the creature affect the environment more? We're going to figure out the ecosystem for 5 or 10 years, and that's where the actual utility is going to come from, I guess. Back to your point.
Yeah, so when we're talking about utility, if there are millions of people that want to start using Bitcoin because their local currencies are terrible, I think we've seen images coming out of Africa. It might have been Nigeria, where people can't get cash from their banks and they're rolling out CBDCs, and people are just not happy trying to get their money out. It's just a mess, right? So it's easy to imagine a lot of demand for alternatives in situations like that. But this is where the question of utility comes in, because the more individuals want to transact on a blockchain, so the more users you have, the lower the utility, because more users means more fees. There's a hard cap on block space, so you sort of have this threshold where where the fees are going to be high enough that new people will be discouraged from coming on board. And how do you deal with that? So the answer that Eric Voskuil has, that a lot of people aren't going to like, is that the only viable sort of pressure valve for this system is you have another instance of Bitcoin, right? Another version of Bitcoin, and we already have different versions of Bitcoin.
Hmm.
We are at a point now where, like you said, fees are a rounding error. We're definitely nowhere close to the utility threshold. So it's easy to point to other versions of Bitcoin and say, "Oh, it failed." Well, did it really fail? I mean, the blocks are still coming out, the networks are still running, and you kind of have to evaluate them the same way you would Bitcoin, right? We don't say it failed because the price is down 80%. So to me, this is one of the most interesting ideas that I came across in cryptoeconomics. It's that it's just a whole different way to look at scaling, right? And you still layer, right? He's not rejecting the Lightning Network as a scaling layer. Like layering, he sees it as a cryptographically secure option. So it's better than other alternatives where you don't have that same security. But at some point, even that maxes out, and you're eventually going to reach the utility threshold. So the idea is that for people that still want the utility of a blockchain, that want the decentralized, censorship-resistant network, once you reach that utility threshold, you find that utility in a different network that's operating under the same principles. But some of the magic numbers might be different. So maybe the blocks are larger. Is that really such a bad thing? Like,
Well,
we
to your
talked about
point
earlier.
on utility, it's like if you want something done now, you might give up a little bit of privacy and security for urgency. And same thing, it's corny, but you have a mechanic, you have a dentist, you have a farmer. You don't ask them to start doing each other's jobs. So even in society, we have very specialized utilities for efficiency reasons. So to your point, it's I could totally see where in 5 or 10 years, even though I don't own any Bitcoin Cash, maybe I need to do something like right freaking now and I don't have time for a 10 minute. I use Bitcoin Cash and maybe I give up some privacy and blah, blah, blah security, but it's done right now. Where like obviously with Bitcoin, maybe the fees will be up to 10 minutes. So to your point, it's different motions for different oceans.
Right. And I think it's important for people to look at other blockchains and try to have at least a framework to assess them as to whether is it like Bitcoin, in what ways is it different from Bitcoin, and is it a viable alternative, or is it a scam, or is it some other thing. So um, we can look at I think we can look at Litecoin and say it's the closest copy of Bitcoin, right? It has all of the same protocol upgrades. It has SegWit, Taproot, Lightning Network. It has its own Lightning Network. It is also one like major upgrade ahead of Bitcoin. And I don't mean that Bitcoin is ever going to implement this, but it has MWeb, which is sort of a privacy extension that also makes the blocks bigger.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
This stuff is all experimental. Like I would even say that to some degree, SegWit, Lightning, and Taproot is experimental.
Oh,
So just having
100%.
the
Yeah.
yeah, so just having the existence of Bitcoin Cash doesn't bother me. Um, I definitely wasn't big on it when I first heard sort of the one-sided story of the block size war, but just seeing like sort of the experimental nature of all these things, having sort of a earlier version of Bitcoin that's still kind of out there in the wild doesn't really bother me. It's there if people need it in the future. Litecoin is there. Monero is there, despite my concerns about centralization. And like you said, with utility, there's different utilities that people are looking for. If people are looking for that very strong privacy without really having to do any work for it, it's there for people that need it. But we need to be able to look at other projects clearly and say that there are some that don't stand on what Eric calls cryptodynamic principles. So Dogecoin is not is not in the same category. A
Wait,
lot of
what?
people
Hold up.
don't
Wait.
really. I think Musk is smart enough that he knows this, but he's kind of, he likes to manipulate
He's a
markets.
billionaire. He's bored, man. If
Yeah,
I was him, I'd be shooting shit on Dogecoin all day on Twitter too, man. It's like I'm about to buy this company. Let me just talk about this meme coin for 3 months.
yeah. So a lot of people don't realize it, but Dogecoin is merge mined, and even then, when people do understand that, sometimes they say they see it as a good thing. But um, Eric has a chapter in Cryptoeconomics called "Dedicated Cost Principle," where he says that a blockchain is only secured by miners' costs that are dedicated to that blockchain. So the Litecoin miners are providing security to Litecoin because there's dedicated costs to mining it. But then the Dogecoin is this like accessory thing where the miners could just get rid of it tomorrow and just keep on mining Litecoin. So it's essentially an asset. It's almost like a security, but it's an asset that's issued from Litecoin, from the Litecoin miners. But it doesn't stand on the same security footing as Litecoin itself. And you can say exactly the same thing about stacks, which again, they're open about the fact that it's a security. Although recently they're trying to they're trying to say, we're not a security anymore. We're
Yeah,
an
yeah,
open, decentralized block. I'm
yeah.
not buying that
Backstep.
at
Yeah,
all.
you buy the lunch and you find out it doesn't taste too good. Yeah.
And then there's another. I know some people this is like a pet project of theirs, but there's a pirate chain that seems to be like really popular within a special niche libertarian crypto circle, and it sits on the same similar footing where it's an asset that's issued on the Litecoin network. So it's not secured by Litecoin. It's it's a thing that could just go away tomorrow.
Well, it's just like Polygon and the Uniswaps of the world, how they integrate with Ethereum, right? Like they integrate with Ethereum, but they have their own, lack of a better word, their own security. They just integrate with Ethereum, right? It's the same idea.
I think the whole game of Ethereum and Uniswap and all these things is miner extracted value, and it's essentially how does the Ethereum Foundation extract as much value as possible from the network. So as there's a lot of talk about tokenizing assets and potentially putting stocks or regular securities on blockchains.
Mm-hmm.
I think all those things are going to happen, but it's not going to be it's not going to provide the opportunities that people assume, where they think that it's as a regular Joe, as an investor,
It's gonna
they're
equal
going to
out,
be able to
yeah.
ride that wave. Where it's like, yeah, I think that it's very possible, but that's going to turn into a walled garden, and you might end up being the bag holder of Sushi Swap or Uniswap tokens when they decide, hey, this is a regulated platform now. Uh, we're just going to build in this trading system, and we don't need like they can let these things develop in the wild, so the technology exists, but to assume to assume that you can hold this token and somehow ride that wave as an investor, you don't own anything when you have that token, right? Like every crypto project that has a token, there's actually a group of people that own the project. That token does not confer any ownership because these are unregulated securities, right? And eventually, we probably are going to see regulated securities on blockchains, or maybe there will be a chosen
Oh
blockchain.
yeah. If it's not fully implemented, is a dangerous phrase. if it's not starting to take hold by at least, like, let's call it the 4 month window before we peak to the next bull market, let's just say it's going to be 24 25, like 2024 25, I'd be amazed because Charles Hoskinson said the only reason that, and he said this like a year or so ago when all the Doge crap was happening, he said the only reason we haven't had more crypto regulation is from the political molasses. Like, let's be honest, I'm not a fan of them, but it's like a lot of shit to not get done from 16 to 20 because Orange Man was in there. It's like half the Republicans didn't like him, not a goddamn Democrat liked him. So it's like if they had a competent person like a Barack Obama too, even a DeSantis, just someone with like two actual brain cells compared to Trump, probably more crypto regulation would have already happened. Just Charles nailed this to a T. Is there's been so much political molasses the last 4 years, especially a little bit before that and moving forward, that now that all that's kind of starting to free up a little bit, back to our point on the nail, we're sticking out pretty tall. And yeah, to your point, if there wasn't just the legacy stock market securities chains, they're coming for us within the next 5 years. Unfortunately, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I don't think any token that doesn't live up to the original premise of censorship resistance and decentralization, I don't think it has a viable investment thesis behind it, because you don't own anything with that token. Um, and in whatever form that crypto assets and tokenization eventually takes on, um, it's not going to be. I don't see it as a vehicle for regular retail investors to be able to uh, take advantage of the trend. I think what it has the potential to do is improve efficiencies in some areas, but like these are things that companies like IBM have been working on for years, and there's no token that you can purchase that's going to somehow let you cash in on this. Like there may be major technological improvements. I don't think they're revolutionary in the way that a truly decentralized network was, like where that was a true discovery of something new. But I think there are sort of like incremental technology improvements that'll happen. And I think it's all going to be like walled gardens. It's going to be internal things, um, you know, and your retail investor is not going to have opportunities to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, Alex. I mean, yeah, you nailed that succinctly. Like Alex Gladstein talks about that a lot. It's a who's club. That's one thing I even find myself trying not to thump on too much. It's hopefully Bitcoin fixes a lot of things, but this idea that in 20 years no one's going to be starving, everyone's going to have six pack abs, driving a Ferrari. It's a utopia. And like I wish that could be the case, but like, you got to live in reality. It's like some people live the perfect life, and then they're 35, they feel like shit, they have cancer, and then 6 months later they're dead. So it's like this idea that we can level everything out. I do get frustrated with some of the maxis, but I mean, yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. It just goes back to a lot of the crypto industry, and even there's some segments of Bitcoin you can throw in this basket where there's a lot of problems out looking for solutions, or a lot of solutions out looking for problems. And it's like, to your point, does this need to be revolutionized? Like, we could argue finance and money had to be revolutionized after 5,000 years of a gold standard, but to your point, do stocks and IPOs really need to be revolutionized, or do they just need small increments like
Well,
every other technology? Well,
I think
technology.
the revolution happened something like 500 years ago, just the idea of having stock in a corporation. Like that was one of the biggest ideas of humanity, right?
Yeah.
That was the revolution. And what we're talking about now, I see as just a minor technical upgrade. It's like we already have electronic stock trading, but people will point to like, oh, there's a few percent here or there that's being wasted because of something. And it's like, okay, like for people that are really into this technology, it's probably interesting. But I think for the average person, whatever changes are going to happen with how stocks are traded, I don't think it's even interesting.
Well, it just goes back to the ROI. It's like not telling um, people what to do, because like you hit on something earlier. One thing that disturbs me in the space is as like a wannabe libertarian, I feel like a lot of the space has a libertarian root. They almost, even Bitcoin maxis, they tell people don't buy Doge, don't buy Uniswap. It's like, well, I thought you're the libertarian. It's like, again, educate them on the risks and the pros and cons of it. But it's like, if they want to go throw $1,000 into Doge, I don't think it's smart. But as Bobby's a grown ass man, do it. But I mean, to your point too, I think it's just like the ROI on the brain space where, yeah, people could maybe try to reinvent Doge some. They could try to take the stock market and put it on Ethereum, Uniswap, blah blah blah. But it's like maybe that makes it only 2 or 3% better. But if we took half that brain space, got them on Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, or maybe just all Bitcoin, it's like how much more can we improve Bitcoin and the ROI on that? How much more would that help society? I can't put a number on it, but to your point, I think if a more of the brain just juices in the space went to Bitcoin instead of these little, like you said, 2% increments, I think we would get to hyper Bitcoinization, adoption, whatever the hell you want to call it. But, again, that sounds good on paper. Road to hell is paved with good intentions. But I do agree with you. I think there's a lot of nothing burgers in the space. There's back to our point, just a lot of solutions out looking for problems, blah blah blah. And I guess just to wrap up again, it was Cryptoeconomics. It was by Eric Voskuil.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, so for me and the people at home, was it an easy read? I just read Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper. It was pretty good. So I'm recently on a crypto kick, so I might get that next because it sounds like there's a lot of
Okay.
takeaways from it.
It is not an easy read. Um, some parts of it are actually really confusing. But Eric himself is actually a great resource because he's very active on Twitter and he will respond to questions. Um, if you don't see the perspective that he's coming from, maybe you're just someone who's not really up to speed on the Austrian school of economics. He can come across pretty rude, but I would say like don't let that stop you. Um, he's still very helpful, and he and very very available to have conversations, which I think is amazing because
It's rare in the
he's one of the
space, yeah.
yeah he's I think he's one of the best people that's working uh, towards helping Bitcoin be the best that it can be, with his book, with information that he's putting out there, and the software project that he's working on.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely check that out when I get a chance. I'm going through some Sam Harris books right now, but that sounds like even if I don't completely get all of it or agree with them, there's something about, even if I read like a crappy book, like I've read the Communist Manifesto twice, and it's just I read it actually again after COVID, which is kind of spooky. But I don't know about you, I feel like sometimes, and this is why I like having you on the podcast and our crypto group. I feel like some of the best meetups we've had is like I go down the rabbit hole with you or even Chris or Rob, and we disagree because I feel like if you just talk to someone or you read a book and you agree with everything they said, it's like you got nothing new out of it. But where if there's something you didn't know, or even better, if you disagree with them, I kind of feel like it can, it's just like the gym. It's like you do the same workout, whatever, you're going to plateau. You throw a couple of different accessories in, but I'll definitely add that to the reading list. But yeah, man, I was gonna say we were going for 2 hours, man. I don't know if you just want to wrap up with anything real quick, any final thoughts, if you want to do any social media plugs, whatever, man, and then we can kind of wrap it up there, man. So yeah, like I said, I appreciate having you on, man. Any final thoughts you got, and probably just put a pin in it there, my man.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to shamelessly plug. You can check me out on Twitter. I'm Cryptoeconomix. So I've changed my handle a few times, but since I've been kind of on a crypto economics kick lately and actually started a meetup group here in Austin to read the book over time, and try to break it down and understand it. So it's Cryptoeconomix on Twitter. And yeah, and I think just the final note I want to leave on is just the idea, the idea about utopia versus reality. And I think a lot of the problems that we got ourselves into uh, comes from utopian thinking. And unfortunately, a lot of these ideas have crept into Bitcoin and Twitter circles. So or crypto. Yeah, so I would just highly encourage people to read Cryptoeconomics because even for people who might not agree with all of it, most people will agree that it's the most rational book about Bitcoin that's ever been written.
No, I think that's a great point to end on, man. Yeah, I think it's just we need a space in general. We just need to actually be realistic and not shoot for the moon and miss. And what's the little increments we can make. But yeah, like I said, anyone listening, I don't know if they'll check it out, but just from talking with you in this little conversation and plus the chats we've had outside of it, I definitely add into my reading list, man. But yeah, appreciate having you on, brother, and hopefully I'll catch you around here soon.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you.